So I'm going to go ahead and start. So I'd like to welcome everybody on behalf of Women in Health Together for the Future. I'm Judy Lewis, and I am the outgoing board chair. We will be announcing new officers very shortly. It's been a pleasure, and I'm going to miss. I will certainly be on these webinars, but it will be someone else's turn to introduce them. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Women in Health Together for the Future if you're not familiar with it. So we are we're incorporated in South Africa at the University of the Western Cape, provides a home for us, and we're very happy with that collaboration. We've been in existence in one form or another since 1991, but we incorporated in 2019. We have always done our work on women's health on many different topics, but gender-based violence has certainly been a very important one. And so today's talk is certainly near and dear to our hearts. We'd like to invite any of you who do not know us to join us. And you can go to our website at w24f.org. And you can become a member. We have everything from associate memberships would come at no cost to paying memberships, which give you full voting rights. And Surika just posted the website, so just so you can go to that if you're interested in learning more about us. In any event, we're really happy to have this topic this morning. I'd like to welcome Samantha van Schalkwyk because she's our speaker on decolonization.
Bush. Umi.
Could you mute? Hold on a second.
Good morning. I think who's the host could muted whoever is the host.
I can't. Okay. Sorry about that. Anyway, Dr. van Schalkwyk has done a considerable amount of research on gender-based violence, and I'll let Michelle say more about that. Dr. Michelle Andepatten, who is the moderator for this session, is our executive director. She is also on the faculty of the University of the Western Cape and has an extensive psychology research background. She's currently the deputy dean of research in the Faculty of Community and Health Sciences. And she's done research on many topics related to gender and health. And she's also worked as the lead for the Center for Diversity in Psychological Practice for about 10 years, ending in 2023. She's very much involved in many community projects and is currently our executive director for Women in Health Together for the Future. So, Michelle, I'm turning this over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this exciting webinar. I think we've all been waiting for it. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Dr. Samantha van Schalkwyk, and she's joined the University of the Western Cape quite recently, and we're very excited to have her on board. So she's a feminist scholar and activist working in the field of gender-based violence and transforming patriarchal trauma. She's a senior researcher at the Community Engagement Unit at UWC, where she's leading processes related to the institutionalization of the Scholarship of Engagement for Societal Impact and driving community-engaged research. She integrates critical feminist research with impactful community-based interventions and training. Holding a PhD in psychology, Dr. van Schalkwyk's academic and activist work spans over 13 years and focuses on gender-based violence at the intersections of historical trauma and the disruption of racialized and patriarchal systems through participatory and collective research methodologies. Dr. van Schalkwyk is the author of Narrative Landscapes of Female Sexuality in Africa, Collective Stories of Trauma and Transition, and she has published widely in internationally peer-reviewed journals such as Feminism and Psychology and Violence Against Women. Her engaged research has included work with African refugees, youth in impoverished townships, and survivors of gender violence across diverse contexts. She strives for her research to achieve societal impact through integrating community voices and imagination into strategies for social change. So I'm handing over to you, Samantha.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Michelle Andy-Patton, for the introduction, but also for the invitation to come and speak today. I'd also like to thank the outgoing board chair, Judy Lewis, for also just welcoming me into the space. And it was just so beautiful to enter and hear the news of, the new grandmother welcoming her grandchild into this world, and just how everyone sort of supported and the excitement around that. And I really just felt that this is just such a lovely space to be in, and what a privilege to be able to share some of my work and my thinking within this space. I'd also like to thank everyone who's joined. Thank you for taking the time to join today. And I also see some of my previous colleagues, one or two have hopped on. So thank you for joining for this session. So I'm going to jump right in there and start sharing my presentation for today. Is that good? Can everybody see?
I think it's clear. I can see from my side.
It's
Judy,
clear
are
on
you all
your
okay that side? Okay, seems the thumbs up are all coming
Fantastic.
up.
Fantastic. My presentation today is titled Decolonial Imagining for Disrupting Gender Violence and Intergenerational Trauma in Post-Apartheid South Africa. And basically, I will be discussing an ongoing research project that I've conducted with young Black marginalized youth at an organization called Chrysalis Academy, which is based in the Western Cape, South Africa. And Chrysalis Academy really offers a space for youth whose schooling have been disrupted for multiple reasons to continue with skills training. Many of these youth did not have opportunity to finish their high schooling, and many who did, the quality of the schooling from the communities that they came from and the poverty meant that they're not really equipped to further their studies. They're not really equipped for the working world, and very importantly, not really equipped to navigate life itself. So this work really centers on what does it mean to be a young Black man living in communities that are still facing the deep impact of trauma post-apartheid, intergenerational trauma, poverty, violence, and to think about how these young men make sense of the violence in their communities and possibilities for disrupting patriarchy and bringing in these youth voices to imagine strategies for change and strategies for how we can address gender-based violence. So that's really the decolonial imagining part of it. And my research is based at this academy, Chrysalis Academy, and my collaborators are Dr. Lucille Mayer and Janine Turner, who are both based at Chrysalis, working with these youth. And then Jessica Yost, who I'll speak about later, is a postgraduate student in social work from the University of Michigan, who assisted us with translating some of this research findings into a zine for more creative dissemination for the communities to use. So firstly, in a webinar based on women's health, what is the relevance of doing research with young men and including young men in this conversation? So when we speak about this disrupting patriarchy research with young South African Black men, what is the link to women's health? And for me, there's a very important link, because in order to understand the high rates of gender-based violence and sexual violence that we're seeing in South Africa, it's important to highlight and interrogate patriarchal structures that result in the normalization of violence. So it's important to look at the everyday lives that these Black men are living, and it's important to understand how they make meaning of violence, and as I discuss later, to hear their vision, what they imagine for social change, what they imagine for social justice, so that they can contribute to shaping a more peaceful future in this country. And also, when we look at the research, we see that often it is the woman when it comes to gender-based violence. In South African research, we see that often the burden is placed on the woman to make sense of gender-based violence, for the woman to protect themselves, for the woman to think about strategies for change. So it's important to include men in this conversation so that we have a sense of shared accountability when it comes to gender-based violence. So we see that women often bear the burden of having these conversations around gender-based violence, and they're always having to have the talk about gender-based violence. So this research is shifting the conversation to hear what these young men have to contribute. And then, of course, we have scholarship like Kapana Ratele, who's documented work on men, violence, love within the South African context, who eloquently shows that patriarchy hurts men just as much as it hurts women by denying them access to certain points of their humanity, denying them access to emotional vulnerability, and by setting up textures of deep violence that men experience at the hands of other men. In South Africa, it's become a daily occurrence on the radio to hear about gang violence and the increase in gang violence in certain communities, about children being shot in the crossfire of the gang violence, and about men being killed. And this is really the context within which my research participants live, these violence-torn communities. My collaborator, Dr. Lucille Mayer, was an anti-apartheid activist, and she really fought for equal rights during the apartheid era. And when we were having a look at these young men's stories that they shared with me about their lives, about their accounts of violence in their communities, she actually just had to take a step back, and she says, you know, I can't believe these are the youth that I fought for, because she just sees the sense of extreme violence they are facing, the sense of hopelessness, joblessness that they are facing in their communities today. Okay, so perhaps to start, what is intergenerational trauma? Now, I'd like to just provide a brief overview. a brief overview of the history of violence in South Africa and the impact of families and communities. So we know that people were divided during apartheid. The policy of apartheid became law and the National Party took power. And it created a criminal justice system that sent Black men to prison for activism, and the continuation of legislation of violence that was used as a means to control Black people. Families were separated, there was surveillance, deep surveillance in communities and embedded violence. The violence normalized hypermasculine behaviors in public society to instill fear and control in Black people who were treated as second-rate citizens. Families were left with few resources. So despite achieving political equality in 1994 with the end of apartheid, many Black South Africans were left with little economic resources or social power, alongside deep white supremacist norms of gender hierarchy inherited from colonial rule, normalized violence against women as a method of men to establish power within the home that they lacked in the public space. So intergenerational trauma refers to the legacies of colonialism and apartheid inequalities that continue to shape the lived experiences of Black individuals and communities today. Hamley and LeGrice provide a definition for us. Intergenerational trauma is the ways in which colonialism has impacted and continues to impact the lives of the indigenous, leaving negative, harmful consequences in its path. And the recognition of such trauma necessarily entails a move away from a westernized lens of dysfunction related to trauma towards an acknowledgement of intersection oppressions of race, class, marginalization, and the histories that come with it that shape young people's experiences. So, as Casey and Bonsai remind us, it's important to recognize the ongoing legacies of historical trauma and how it shapes the lives of Black youth. Is there something coming through there? Can I continue?
Can we mute the person whose mic is on?
Everybody, please mute yourself. I don't know who's.
No, I know it's somebody who's got somebody's name, but there's no way I can't mute anybody for some reason. I always have been able to before.
Okay.
That's all right. Should I just continue? Can you still hear me?
Just continue,
Yeah,
please.
Please
Please, everyone, mute yourself. If you're not speaking, you should be on mute.
I think maybe they just moved away from their computer and perhaps forgot it.
I can't.
So the intergenerational cycles. It's okay. Don't worry about that. I think
That's
it's
because I'm not the
down
host.
now.
Samriti, are you the host? Samriti.
No.
Okay, so none of us is the host. That's why we can't mute. Whoever is speaking, thank you. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, Samantha. Please,
No
please
problem. I'll continue now. Intergenerational cycles of poverty and violence in South Africa today. So we can see that the legacy of apartheid and colonialism can be felt at all levels of society. And the deep intergenerational trauma that's coming through in communities today. On an individual level, many people on an individual level carry the emotional and psychological scars of apartheid. On a social level, when we speak about forced removals, fractured families, and the lasting effect of this. Socially, on a community level, townships and informal settlements, which were used to segregate people, which still remain very under-resourced and spatially isolated. And this is important when we think about the implications of gender-based violence and when we think about what sort of interventions we can use to address gender-based violence and intergenerational trauma, because there's such a severe lack of resources in these communities. And that's also where Chrysalis Academy, who take on youth for skills training and healing, plays such an important role within this environment. And also when it comes to healing masculinities. So we can also see the effects in institutions and society, the built-in systemic inequalities, built into the healthcare system, education, the lack of access that people have to these systems is still very much starkly evident within our context. And then, of course, the continuation of social norms and historical forces, particularly when we're speaking about gender-based violence, looking at norms of violent masculinities, and also at gender norms, which really underpin violence. We can also see that when we talk about violence, such communities are also stigmatized by the media and such. So the racial dimension also comes in. So gender-based violence in the current South African landscape, the first national South African national gender-based violence study, 2022, was published in 2024, and this was a baseline survey on victimization and perpetration by the Human Sciences Research Council. And we see that 33.1% of South African women aged older than 18 have experienced physical violence in their lifetime, which is approximately 7.31 million women, and 9.8 have experienced sexual violence, approximately 2.15 million. And we see regularly the news accounts of femicide and rape, and scholars have well documented this normalization of violence within particular spaces. We have students writing about the normalization of gendered and sexual violence on university campuses, the microaggressions that students experience on university campuses, and other spaces. We have studies documenting the fear that women live in. Pumla Kola, a South African scholar, called it the female fear factory. So the ever working fear that is set up by dominant discourses and practices that position women as responsible for their own safety, but that also constantly remind women that violence is always a possibility. And the same author has provided us with a book, and we see from the title, very meaningful title when it comes to think about the statistics of femicide and rape in South Africa, with the book Rape, a South African Nightmare. So the questions for this project, the Disrupting Patriarchy Research Project, that I deal with today in my presentation, that we cover looking at these young men's narratives, where what are the textures of racialized and gendered violence experienced by these youths attending Chrysalis Academy, their parents and communities. And it's from the voices of the youth themselves. How do they make meaning of this violence that they witness, this violence that they are part of? Many of the young men speak about their involvement in gangs from the age of 11 years old, and they're speaking from the place, their position within Chrysalis Academy now. They've been through a 3-month program, a gender program, skills training that the Academy offers them. And they were speaking to me, sharing about their past involvement in gangsterism and the sense of shame that it brings with them now, but also the renewed sense from this program of making connections again with family and friends, of repairing ruined relationships, of thinking differently about women in their lives, of thinking differently about men in their lives. And very evident was conceptualizations of violence that that spoke about the violence that they'd experienced at the hands of their fathers. And this was not only about physical violence, this was not only about witnessing violence, the physical violence take place in the home or in the street or in the community. This was largely about absent fatherhood and about fathers leaving and never making contact again. It was about abandonment and what they narrated to be the violence of abandonment. And it was about the violence of isolation as well, of not having male role models within their community that they could turn to when needed. So the second question, quite strongly linked to the decolonial imagining that I mentioned in my title. How do participants imagine and embody a South Africa healed along the lines of race and gender? So what does this mean for them? They are young, they are so-called born free, so born after democracy in South Africa. What does race mean for them? What does gender mean for them? And how do they make the links to violence, the violence they see in their communities? And then lastly, what theoretical and practical insights can we glean for processes that work towards disrupting colonial, racialized, and patriarchal trauma? So a bit about the theoretical grounding of the study. And when we speak about decolonizing, we're speaking about changing institutional mindsets, changing systems, including the way we think about how we do research, and including the way we think about developing tools to address gender-based violence and tools to address intergenerational trauma. So it's about thinking differently, about even the process of creating educational tools and what that means. It's about co-creation. So this work really looked at, it provided space for these men and for us who are holding their stories, the researchers, to emphasize the effective dimensions of violence and to hold space for pain, to hold space for the memories as they want to present their memories, and to also hold space for silence. And as South African scholar Tammy Sheffer reminds us, such research should be with youth, not on them, and should foreground participatory, relational, and justice-orientated methodologies. And it should explore how youth navigate their own sexualities, their own masculinities, and how they navigate violence within contexts shaped by historical trauma and intersectional equalities, as I've mentioned. And such processes should be participatory. It should be relational, including relationship building between the researchers, the youth workers, the youth facilitators who are working on the project. And the goal should be justice-orientated, social justice-orientated, but there should be a critical approach about what that means for everyone involved. And such approaches should foreground young people's voices and also their lived realities. So the gender program that these young men participated in was part of the GERI, Gender Equity and Reconciliation International methodology that they incorporated into the program at the Academy, a 3-month program. And it provided spaces for them to dialogue, to talk about, to engage in creative activities around their gender conditioning, which really provides space where participants can reimagine themselves beyond the constraints of inherited trauma and patriarchal scripts. So once again, linking quite strongly to the decolonial imagining. So this project left open space for care, created space for agency, and for the youth to critique the processes along the way. And the youth's voices, as you'll hear in a few minutes, are the main sources of data for us to reimagine how we might reframe such gender programs differently. That's where the space of critique came in. What's working for the youth, what is not, what can they imagine we can do differently, and how so. So using youth voices in a way that can redesign or develop programs that better suit the needs of Black youth from violence-torn communities, because we're not only looking at gender, we're looking at the intersections of intergenerational trauma that come in. So that has to be part of any gender program. And really, we have to look at processes that affirms participants as co-constructors of meaning and knowledge. So interviews were conducted with 20 Black individuals who took part in this 3-month program at Chrysalis Academy. And the young men reflected on violence in their communities. They reflected on their identities, but also their emotional worlds. They spoke to us about what it meant for them participating in the gender program at Chrysalis Academy. So the methodology affirmed participants' agency, allowing them to begin the work of disrupting dominant patriarchal discourses on gender violence and healing. And the work disrupted discourses that position youth as passive or pathological, giving them the agency. Some of the themes and the key themes that I speak about today in relation to decolonial imagining are outlined here. And the first is that through these processes of the gender program and the interviews, the storytelling sessions with the researcher, these young men started to name inherited, racialized, and patriarchal violence when they spoke about the violence that they witness in their communities and the violence they've experienced in their lives. There was a recognition of how pain is passed down through silence and shame. And they began to reflect on the normalization of violence in their communities. Secondly, these young men started to disrupt dominant masculinities and challenge rigid patriarchal masculine norms related to violence, invulnerability, and suppressing emotion. They imagined new subjectivities. So they discussed moments of vulnerability when they were engaging with the gender program with other youth. And they discussed how moments of vulnerability actually became spaces for relational healing. And particularly when young men spoke about abandonment from their fathers and the pain around that, that was really significant for other young men to witness these stories. They spoke about recreating communities of care, a central role that Chrysalis Academy played by bringing these youth together, diverse youth together. And they spoke about creating a sense of brotherhood, embracing vulnerability, and of course, imagining a South Africa healed across racialized and gendered lines, and what that means for them, and what others sharing meant for them. Lastly, the youth spoke about their own imaginings of what social justice is and what it should look like. They spoke about what social justice means to them, and they positioned themselves as agents of change, speaking about what they'd like to do, moving back into their communities. So I'd like to now, after outlining the themes, perhaps just to provide some examples and go through them for you. You're welcome to read along with me. I've highlighted some examples just to unpack the texture of each theme from the participants' voices. So the theme of naming inherited, racialized, and patriarchal violence. Cheslin says, growing up in that view of being a man, and that a lot of times they choose violence, and wanting to get someone out of the way to get them on the path, which I felt is wrong. I feel until today it is still wrong, but because in the everyday life cycle, you see, at the point sometimes I would like to start thinking that it's okay, but not in the sense that I want to, but because of how much I see it, as in the violence. Colwyn speaks about gangs in relation to his involvement in gangs from the age of 11. He speaks about gangs in his community. It's not just one gang. There are multiple gangs that live in the area there by me, and they don't give two flips about who's who. They will rob. They're here on your head, meaning the threat of them pressing down. They will steal the soul out of your body. That is how bad it is for us. But like I said, I just try to take it day by day, not rushing the process, trying to avoid all that negativity and things like that. And Dylan, so for me growing up, I didn't have a father. How can I say? He went to go buy soap and then he left. So since now I'm almost turning 23, for 23 years, I didn't see my father. Disrupting dominant masculinities. When the visitation at Chrysalis Academy came, this is a day, and there are 2 opportunities during the 3 months for the family to come visit, where family and friends come on site to the campus, which is up on the mountain in the Western Cape. When the visitation came, so it's my godmother, my mother, and then my eldest brother's wife, and my brother, my youngest brother, all there, but they brought my mommy with, man, which was unexpected. I actually shed a tear. I tried to hold it in, but I couldn't. I just couldn't, because they all mentioned they are proud of me. I used to phone them out of the police station, come fetch me here, I need help. It is better this way, as in at Chrysalis Academy. I just can't fall back into gangsterism. That is one thing I'm actually afraid of, falling back. But I know I won't, man. And then imagining new subjectivities. New subjectivities that are different from violent masculinities. And you see here's a group of Africans, here's a group of colors. It's not African and colored together. It's always the different races separate. It's not nice, man. So for me to go back in my community, I'd like to be that agent of positive change, where I'd like to change their mindsets, interact with everybody, teach them and equip them with the knowledge and skills that they need, and actually see them put it into play and practice what they preach. Because I'd like to practice what I preach, especially after today. The things that I've shared, I'd like to put them into action, because I believe what you speak into the atmosphere will appear in existence, because I've witnessed it. The youth also spoke about communities of care, connecting, crying with each other, witnessing another person's story and opening up to others, acknowledging that we all carry hurt and sadness, and imagining social justice. What does social justice mean for you? Colwyn says taking what he's learned at the academy through the gender program and applying it within his community in different ways, getting children off the streets, doing positive things for children, aftercare programs. So the key research findings are that these young Black youth's understanding of violence in their communities very often did not acknowledge the historical impact of apartheid, racial violence, and dehumanization, and the devastating effects of generational patriarchy. So in other words, many of these young men did not make the link between historical trauma and the current brutal violence, including gender-based violence and rape, that they're seeing in their communities, that they're seeing in their everyday life. And the research findings shows that this gender program that they experienced at the academy was valuable, but there's a need for such programs to be revised to better suit the needs of youth who are living in communities facing the ongoing impact of historical violence and trauma. Participants' narratives also highlights the importance or the power of telling these stories as a space for reflection, critical thinking, to reclaim their agency, and also as an important decolonial practice that helps these youth make meaning about their lived experiences within the larger context of historical violence and structural oppression. And then the storytelling as a tool of resistance, healing, and transformation. So, looking at finding different ways of bringing these youth stories in beyond just publishing an academic text. Myself and my colleagues from Chrysalis Academy and Jessica Yost, who's the student who worked from us from the University of Michigan, went through these narratives, and we co-developed. Jessica put it together, but we had multiple meetings about what will be included, which voices what kind of information is needed in communities about gender-based violence and how these can be used by Chrysalis Academy, by the students who graduate from this 3-month program when they move back into their communities. Some are ambassadors in their communities, and they will utilize this resource. So this is part of our ongoing project. But the zine has been developed, and I can share the full one with you, but these are parts of the zine and how we put together in a more creative way, putting these men's voices into a tool for addressing gender-based violence, their voices, their experiences, their meaning making as something that communities can use. So there's the cover on the left, Disrupting Patriarchy. And then we drew on some of the men's stories, some of which I've covered already. And we speak about action in the communities. We speak about unlearning. So what are the implications for working with youth to address GBV and intergenerational trauma? Inaction renders violence acceptable. We need trauma-informed and gender-informed approaches. And youth stories can be translated into a form of public scholarship, as we have done with youth as the co-producers, not just the consumers of knowledge. And their stories, experiences, and meaning-making about violence must be documented so we can build up a knowledge base of best practices based on the voices of the youth themselves. True change happens when relationships are about co-creation and meaning as we work together. So concluding thoughts, what is decolonial imagining? The stories I've covered here today about men's meaning making around the violence in their lives and the communities give us some insight into their vision and their ideas for what needs to happen to disrupt patriarchy. So naming inherited, racialized, and patriarchal violence, disrupting dominant masculinities, imagining new subjectivities, recreating communities of care, and imagining social justice are key elements of the youth exercise.
Can we just ask, sorry, Samantha, everybody to unmute? Somebody's mic is still on there.
Yeah, it's Eckert. Mordecai, can you please mute yourself?
Can you see her? I can't see because I've got the slide.
Yeah, they have done it. I saw that. Okay,
There
please
you go.
continue. Samantha, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so naming inherited, racialized, and patriarchal violence, disrupting dominant masculinities, imagining new subjectivities, and then this process of thinking about recreating communities of care and imagining social justice are key elements of these youth exercising their decolonial imagination. And the zine that we produced and similar creative products are tools to amplify the voices of marginalized Black men to inform the practical work of disrupting patriarchy. They illuminate co-creation for social change. We are developing this work, and we want to take it from the level of the zine once we've had feedback on the zine and we see how it will be used by the communities. We want to develop this into a full resource for facilitators working with youth on gender and violence and intergenerational trauma, incorporating the youth voices into this educational material, into these interactive resources. So all of this links to the literature we see on radical hope, which is the will and movement towards alternative possibilities, wherein the charge is to resist and protest and not to be dehumanized, not to be treated as second-class citizens, not to be marginalized, and to secure a legacy in place for our future generation. Doing feminist work should offer space for marginalized youth to imagine, articulate, and very importantly, to also contribute to alternative futures. This is an expression of radical decolonial hope, as we see also in the work of Bunzai and Van Niekerk in their book, which looks at youth agency and gender violence in South Africa. And we should include young marginalized Black men so their voices can contribute to how we can imagine a life without gender and racialized violence. Here's some more of the zine, and I'm happy to share. We also have a digital copy of the zine. You'll see on the right, there's also some prompts, healing conversation starters, things that youth might want to take into their communities when they use this resource. So thank you. And here are my contact details at the Community Engagement Unit at the University of the Western Cape. And I'd also, yes, like to use this opportunity to say, please also contact us. We have an upcoming colloquium, which is all about the scholarship of engagement for societal impact, pathways towards sustainability. And it is online, so I would love it for you to, if you could contact me and join us. It's in October, 22nd and 23rd of October. And you can then also hear more about the unit's work at our university. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Dr. van Schalkwyk. I agree with Sarika. This was really, really a good presentation. Just some thoughts from my side, coming from South Africa and looking at the stats again and just how shocking and horrifying the statistics are. And coming from a psychological background myself, when we talk about abandonment and we talk about isolation, we somehow don't think about it in the context of violence. And so I was very struck when you spoke about the violence of abandonment and the violence of isolation. Another comment I'd like to make, colleagues, something that we're witnessing in our country after, well, post-apartheid, there seems to be a new form of racism emerging. And you spoke about Black almost in a generic sense. And we always used to consider ourselves as Black oppressed, but we know within that broad category there was the category of colored and then African Black. And we're seeing on social media how these groupings are starting to polarize, and the blaming game, the one group blaming the other group, saying you didn't do enough during the apartheid era, which is creating quite a stir within communities and particularly within the Western Cape. So we're really faced with so many demons, not just gender, but race seems to be becoming quite an issue again in our country. So thank you very much on behalf of WHDF. Colleagues, I'm going to open the floor for any questions, any comments you'd like to make. Samantha did advertise the colloquium coming up. So if you'd like, we can share it. You can share it with me or Judy, and we can share it with the group as well.
Fantastic.
So the
Thank
floor's
you.
open,
Thank you very
colleagues. Judy, if I don't see hands, please just help. I am looking. Or Samantha.
Hi, I would like to ask Samantha, thank
Go
you
for it.
very much for a wonderful conversation. I would like to get some more insight. I mean, we are in India. The whole thing about the gangs being there, within the gangs, how do they operate? So because I mean, what we see on Netflix or whatever, that also the black gangs are there which are protecting the women, or do they do that? And then there are the white gangs. So how do these gangs operate, and how is patriarchy, feeding into it? And there are women gangs also. They're gang leaders with women. So how does that interplay? I wanted to know about
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that question. It's very complex in South Africa, and also, as Prof. Andy Patton mentioned, when it comes to race, black and colored, these categories, these apartheid constructed categories that still very much live on, in theory and practice, and how everything is played out. The gangs are usually very specific to race and to area. So they're gangs in the colored areas, the social colored areas, they're gangs in the black townships. One of my doctoral students, who is actually just finished his work, he looked particularly at the black gangs in Khayelitsha township, and how the gangs really there was sort of a war over different areas in the township and a struggle over ownership and occupying space in different areas. And it's very interesting because this also seems to stem from violent masculinities among youth who go to schools in these areas, because it also starts then the territorial nature of this almost conflict, as you will, where the young boys on a Friday afternoon will from the different schools will meet in an area and fight each other. So it's very territorial. And with the gangs in the poor colored communities, so Mitchell's Plain, Lavender Hill, communities like that, we hear a lot about violence against women happening within those gangs, and ownership over women, which seems to be the main thread. There's more ownership over women when it comes to conflict, not as much protecting women, I would say. And then very much linked to the drug wars and the substances and the selling of drugs in these communities, and the profit around that, which is very much linked to the gang violence, and where some of the young men who participated in my study took part in activities actually killing other people, being involved in setting up the murder of someone related to gangs and drugs.
Thank you for that question. Judy, you may go.
Yeah, I just following on your last point, one of the things that struck me in these interviews was that people said they worried about what was going to happen when they went back home into that same environment. And so what kinds of support does this program provide to them after they leave the program?
Yeah.
Thank
you. Thank you. Thank you, Judy, for your question. Yes, it was a great concern, particularly for the young men who'd been involved in gangs for most of their life, who don't have the support from fathers or male figures who, at the home, who don't have support from family members. They were worried about going back into their communities. Are the gang leaders going to find them? Or perhaps are these young men not going to find employment? They won't be able to sustain themselves. And then that also leads to sort of re-entering the gangs. These were some of the real pressing issues on their mind. And Chrysalis Academy sets up skills training they do the skills training on site, and then they set up internships for these young men at police stations, fire stations, they can choose, electrical internships. So the young men are set up into a work internship when they leave the academy. And many of them, if they'd like, become youth ambassadors for their communities. So they are called back into Chrysalis for additional skills training. They're involved in programs in the communities. But that being said, much needs to be done to set up programs, more longer term programs. And it would actually be interesting to interview these young men, a couple of months after they leave the academy. Should they be reachable then to hear about what their experience was leaving the academy. But the important thing is to find ways, and this is linked to co-creation, to find ways where one can one can work with these youth to develop skills that are translatable in the communities. So social skills, many of these young men wanted to continue with what they'd learned in the Jerry program and become involved as facilitators, for example. So it's about finding ways and resources that they can take with them to contribute to their communities long term. Because for programs and for academies like Chrysalis, just realistically resource-wise, there aren't resources to support youth who've left the program long term, to support all the youth that go through the program. So it's always, in our context, the worry about resources. So how can we set up skills that people take away with them, and perhaps point of contact and support, where students can also be agents of change when it comes to that in their communities, and also connect with others. So we have almost pockets of support. Yes.
Thank you for that. There's a question. Samridi, you may go.
Not all the Samridis are Samridi, so I don't know.
Okay. Oh,
Yes.
sorry. There are two, Mona, and then I'm not sure who that is.
The person whose name Samridi is showing up on the screen, could you ask a question? Your hand is up on the screen.
Yeah, I'm Mona.
Okay.
No, there was someone with Samridi as a name. Okay. Samridi? Yeah.
Hi, sorry, I have no idea how this happened. I am definitely not some ready girl. I
Oh, it's
don't know how I got that
Lucania.
name. I have no idea. This is the second time this is doing to me. So I really apologize for that. So I want to ask, sorry, please. Firstly, I just want to apologize. I'm driving, so if you
Okay.
struggle to hear me, just let me know. So I've somewhat of a controversial question. And it's really around cause I don't know what the proper name is for it, but I'm calling it conscientious criminality, or conscientious conscientious criminal. And really, so what I'm asking is it possible? I mean, I'm just piggybacking on the question that Judy asked earlier about some of the concerns that these young people have going back to the communities and what kind of support they will have, and the fact that, you know, in many cases, participating in these gangs is in a way, and I'm putting this in quotation marks, an economic activity, in the sense that this is a way of survival for many young people coming from these impoverished settings, and crime can be seen as a way of just trying to survive.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
and my question, the question arises from experiences that I've had. I mean, growing up in a black township in South Africa, where you've seen criminals who have a conscience and are able to, you know, to listen to to voices of sort of respected people within a particular community, who are able to tell them, you know, certain things, certain behaviors that need to refrain from within that particular community, and how to protect vulnerable people within that particular community. But, you know, obviously things have changed since then, and I just want to get your thoughts on that, and whether you think that is something that is possible, that, you know, it's possible to prime young people into a different, to make them conscientious in terms of violence, while they may still participate in this
I think we lost him there.
kind of criminal activities. I'm not sure if my question is making sense.
Okay, so thank you for your question.
Did you get my question?
Yes, so you're basically speaking about the necessity, the economic necessity for young men to be involved in these criminal activities, and as a form of survival, and what impact leadership and mentorship in communities might have on that. Am I correct?
That's what I also heard.
Yes. Okay. Okay. And yeah, I mean, absolutely, absolutely. Participating in gangs is an act of survival. I mean, for many men, it's not even about having what they, in their language, the fancy clothes that gangs provide them with. It's actually about the food packs and providing for their families. But then there's another dimension to it, and that is that the gangs also provide these young men with a sense of belonging in violence-torn, devastated communities where we see the absolute wreckage of, you know, the social and material life. Sometimes being involved in a gang offers these young men a sense of belonging. So if we could create mentorships via sports clubs, churches, which is also what my student found to be these sites of healing, the sports and the churches where people could stand up and be mentors for these youth, where they offered spaces to actually to receive other perspectives and to learn from others. I think that could go a long way. But what we seriously need is people to help put in place forms of entrepreneurship within these communities, and skills training towards, you know, setting up small businesses so that people could at least have the dignity of making something work for themselves, without often having to be drawn into this criminal activity, which comes with it much dissonance and also you know, shame. So it really is about belonging and dignity and finding ways to work with those elements to work with the youth. And something like the scene or even a gender program manual could also be ways where people, if you know, if funding is received, where people could be employed to work on meaningful activities like that.
Thank you. Mona's next, and then Awa.
Can I just follow
Mona,
up?
you can.
Michelle?
Are you
Yes.
done, Lukanya?
Yes,
I
I'm
just
here.
wanted to follow up and clarify it's the question that I was asking, if it's possible.
We are running a bit out of time,
Okay,
Lukanya.
no, it's fine.
So
Okay, all right.
let me give Mona and our chance, and maybe we can connect with Samantha at UWC.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Samantha, for really insightful presentation and these challenges also is facing young men. So I'm thinking that about last 2 points you are talking about recreating community for care and use imagining social justice. Link it to the inherited intergenerational trauma and how can plan those people in the academic graduated that to apply skills for supporting these two area because we know that in some of the African country or most of the African countries, these social norms, stereotypes, and all these things is really inherited, and it is affecting the outcome for long-term intervention, particularly when it comes to this violence issue, intergenerational trauma. So from your experience, what do you think that can people utilize this two areas, recreating community for care and use for imagining to overcoming such kind of challenges facing youth in some of the African countries, in particular in South Africa? Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you so much for your question, a powerful question. And I think when it comes to creating spaces where people can think about their own creation and communities of care and fostering that, and also creating spaces where we can work together to reimagine what social justice might mean for the youth. what has really come out strongly and linked to the act of imagining is, art-based methods where youth can actually have the space to, first of all, the storytelling component, and particularly the power of intergenerational storytelling, where they can hear about the impact of historical trauma within the broader context and situate their experiences. That was linked to my findings, which actually showed that link for youth, there needs to be work around that, sort of creating that critical lens when that through which they can interpret violence, but then also art-based methods, which allows, and perhaps beyond just language, which allows different creative methods and spaces to really access emotion and safety, but also that imaginative element about, what do we need for the future, because it's not there, and it's something that we need to work in different ways to harness. And I think that the creative arts-based methodologies and definitely collaborative, collective methodologies are really going to take us to different places that we've been before.
Thank you, Samantha. I think for our last question from Arwa.
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Samantha, for your informative presentation. And I know that this kind of researches will take a lot of risk at many levels, and a lot of challenging for yourself, for your community, to reveal all the underneath gender relations, to understand our identity and what we actually own to our next generation. So actually, part of my question was answered by one of your reflection to one of the questions previously, when you were asked about the tools of the program to support those young men. So I was really fascinated by the headlines of your findings, because I guess every one of them can be a headline for the next upcoming paper or even a research. So my question was, are you interested in the follow-up? I guess you are, but I'm admiring the close of gap that your research have done regarding the South African community. So in owning and celebrating this kind of gap closure, maybe you should go to the next, my question becoming a recommendation now, go to the next step and recommend for further researches and studies, because as I told you, each finding deserve a research by itself. And I guess the result will shake your head. The transformation of those kids, and maybe they will be the changing agent that they are aiming to be. So it's a promising research, and I guess you're just at cycle A. So go ahead to cycle B, and good luck. I really like it.
Thank you. That's really just so beautiful. Yes. And at the moment, extending the work, the next step is the gender program manual, so a full resource for facilitators, but in involving youth. And then writing up also the findings in different ways, but then definitely expanding to different areas, different countries. We've put in a proposal for the continuation or extension of this project with a collaboration with the University of Glasgow and a collaborator, Professor Dennis Francis, who's based there in the School of Education. And we really also want to use that project to create these gender resources, but also to connect youth from different countries. So to connect youth from Glasgow with youth from South Africa, using technological tools where they can connect in real time and discuss issues around gender-based violence, because it's also important for youth to see that these issues also happen in other parts of the world, and to connect around experiences and resources when it comes to gender violence, but also other forms of intersecting traumas. So thank you very much for the comment. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. van Schalkwyk. Colleagues, I think we've reached the end. We've gone a bit over time, although we did start late. I also just want to draw your attention, Samantha, you spoke about creative methodologies, arts-based methodologies, and we're also hosting a conference the end of September, beginning of October, called Create 2025, and it's Creative and Engaged Transdisciplinary Search for Health Equity in Africa. I did post it in our WHDF group. The closing date is the 18th of September, and some of the themes that we are going to be looking at is exactly that, alternative, creative, innovative methodologies to use in our community-based research, particularly where literacy rates are not high, not good, and methodologies more suited for research in communities that we serve. So thanks, Samantha. This was very, very insightful. I hope we can invite you back at some point, that we could continue these conversations, because in my own experience, I also understand and realize that often when we talk about gender-based violence, it's mainly about women and we leave out the voices of men. And I think this is critical if we're wanting to see real change and transformation within our communities. So thank you to WHDF, thank you Judy and colleagues for all the work in getting this advertised, and thank you everybody for joining and for participating today. And
I just wanna
WHDF will inform you about the next webinar. Over to you, Judy.
Thank you, Prof.
One quick thing,
Andipati.
Michelle. I want to thank you both for a really stimulating presentation and discussion. And also to thank Nigat Huda and Surika Tayati, who are the program chairs who organized this session, and Samriti Bagal, who has been the person promoting this activity online. So thanks to everyone who made this possible. And we hope we'll all see you on October 16th for our next webinar on bridging education and health for Afghan women. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Judy.
you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you to the organizers. Thank you for the invite.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.